Okay, this is the 5-cent tour of Todd's solar trailer. So we have six 327 watt panels plus 5 100 watt panels mounted onto the trailer. And we also have, as you can see, 3 additional panels leaned up against the trailer temporarily. They're there just to produce some extra power while the trailer is sitting here in stationary position. I got these all used from a vendor or from private folks in Phoenix who were selling used panels. So this is where the power comes out. This is one box here, which has a 20 amp GFI with a switch to turn it on and off. This one here is the 30 amp RV outlet. Each one is wired into the inverter on a separate circuit. Anyway, so we have the 5 panels located 2 on each side. Then we have the 3 327 watt panels on the roof. We have 1 here on the front. We have 2 327 watt panels here on the sides. There's the additional 100 watt panels up on the sides there. And then very lastly, we have 1 panel at the very end, at the very back, mounted hanging over the back of the trailer. So the trailer itself is just a light utility trailer. Open up the side door here and go through the technical part of the system. I'll turn some lights on here. So we have a we have 1 inverter, which is rated at 6,000 watts maximum output. I'll put this over here, video. So we have 1 6,000 watt inverter, which also serves as a switch, a line switch. It will switch between battery power, inverter power, and grid power, depending on what the level of the batteries are. And that inverter is rated at 6,000 watts, which is the equivalent of 50 amps at 120 volts. It does not do split phase, it just does single phase. So we'll go through some of the aspects of it. So we have 2 lithium ion LiPo batteries, each one rated at 100 amp hours, 51.2 volts, which is the preferred voltage when doing off-grid systems like this. It allows you to have a lower wire gauge and still be able to do a higher capacity. I also have the battery meter here, which tells me the current battery voltage, tells me whether current is going into the battery or out of the battery. Right now you can see there's 6.33 amps going into the battery from solar, which equates to 332 watts, keeps changing. And that power is going from the solar panels into this inverter, and then this inverter is converting it into 120. It is also powering 2 fridges in the garage, and if the leaf were plugged in, it's also powering the leaf. So the external panels that I've got outside are all coming through, and they're bridging into input PV number 2. So we have PV number 1 and PV number 2. So PV number 2, as you can see right now, is producing 400 watts. And if we go back on this, we can work our way through the settings. Let's see here. I can't remember how to go back to the main screen here. All right, we got PV1 is producing 1.2 amps at 113 volts, equivalent of let's see, PV2 is 100 volts at 4 amps, so 400 watts. And where was PV1 in wattage? Okay, it's got all kinds of stuff here in the menus. Where was PV1? There we go. All right, PV1, that's the input. That's the grid input of 123 volts. Output is putting in 100 volts, 120, excuse me. And so PV1 is putting out 90 volts and 1.2 amps, which is 111 watts. And PV2 is putting out 101 volts at 4 amps, so 400 watts. So the sun is, as you can see, not fully extended onto the system, so it's not yet producing. When it's producing at maximum capacity, it typically will put somewhere between 25 and 30 amps of charging into the battery. It's at 50 volts. And the total wattage output, I've seen it go as high as 1.8 kilowatts or 1800 watts. This is the 120 volt breaker box. So we've got the power coming from the inverter over here. This is the AC output, goes into this panel, sub panel. Now we have two different circuits. One is a 30 amp, one is a 20 amp, and the 30 amp is what powers that RV plug, has its own breaker, and then we have the 20 amp which powers the 20 amp GFI. We have a second battery here. Both of them are they're done in parallel, but they're wired up in such a way that the positive for the main system goes from one battery. Then there's a red cable going between the two positives. The negative connects to this battery, and then there's a cable running between the two batteries that's supposed to keep the voltage equalized. I have found that the two batteries do not necessarily always have the same voltage, and as you can see, one of them is blinking saying that it's low voltage because it's somewhere under 25%. This one here is blinking that the second, it's got the second of four state of charge dots blinking, meaning that it is above 25%, and there is no alarm light on because it's not below whatever the minimum voltage is. In addition, I also have a 12 volt, 50 volt to 12 volt converter, and I have that in place so that I can have 12 volt things that I can put in the trailer that don't require the inverter to be on. So I have several lights plugged into that, like this one and that one. In addition to that, I have a fan, which is a critical part of the whole system because in the summer it's going to get over 100, it's going to be 110 or more degrees outside, and with the sun shining on the trailer, it's absolutely critical to make sure the temperature doesn't get any hotter than the air temperature. So this fan will be running non-stop. It runs on DC power from the battery through the 12 volt system. Does not require the inverter to be on in order to operate. And then the batteries I have two vents installed below the battery case here, which allow fresh air with a filter to come in from the outside. So when the doors are all shut, this will be where the air intake comes. It will go across the batteries, and then it'll have some sort of a vent which will allow the air to then flow up and around the inverter, thus hopefully keeping the equipment as cool as possible, and ideally no hotter than the ambient air temperature. So right now, let's see, what else did I want to say here? It looks like as you can see, the sun is climbing. Our input from the sun is getting bigger and bigger. We've got 507 watts, 508, 514, and it keeps climbing. And probably within the next half hour, we'll see that amount go up over 1,000 or go into the 1,500 range. This here is the shunt for the battery meter. That is a requirement if you want a battery meter to work accurately. It essentially goes between the negative terminal of the battery and the supply load, so that everything that goes in or out of the battery has to run through that shunt. It allows the meter to get an accurate reading both on amperage and voltage going in and out, as well as the battery capacity. I found that battery capacity is somewhat difficult to gauge. It says 19%. As you can see, this battery here is somewhat over 25. That one here is below 25. So I suppose 19% represents somewhat of a decent average. So anyway, that's the solar trailer. I've got my tools in here and so forth. This is my weekend project. Oh, and this here, by the way, that plug is connected to the grid power that I have going into this system. So you can see this thick wire. I had to use this because I didn't have a very thick, a long wire, so I had to combine two wires together put a junction box plug here, which actually proves to be quite handy if I have the inverter off and I still need 120 power to operate something here in the trailer. I can use this plug. Then I have this 8-gauge wire, which routes all the way back through this. And now I will show you on the other side where that comes out. Comes out here through this RV plug. I put in an RV plug terminal here, and then this plugs into the 120 outlet here in the house. So we have one plug which goes over to the devices which are powered by the trailer, and another plug which goes into the wall. So this is the RV plug that powers that AC input into the system. Runs over. Then this one here is the output plug. I've built a very heavy duty plug here to put the charger for the car on, as well as the extension cord that goes in and powers the various fridges that we've got. We've got 2 fridges here which run continuously on this system. So no matter what we're doing, we always have the load of at least those 2 fridges. The load, interestingly enough, varies between 100 watts and 300. It never seems to get much more than that. And then most importantly, most of the charge ends up going right into the car. And usually what we do is we deplete the battery. Each day the battery gets depleted down to something like 10%, about 15%. And I have the system set to automatically cut off as soon as the battery level goes below a certain level, so that we have enough power to get through the night, running whatever's on 12 volt and whatever loss that happens from having the inverter turned on. And that way every morning the battery charges around 15%, assuming that we charge the car enough to deplete it. Sometimes we don't deplete it all the way if we don't drive the car very much. Sometimes the power usage is less than what accumulated over the course of the day. Sometimes we only drive the car maybe 3 or 4 miles, which might mean that there's not enough usage between the fridges and the 5-mile charging to use whatever has built up. Right now we are still waiting to see what the power generation will be once we get into the longer days. Right now we're getting close to spring equinox, and so the power already, I've noticed, is for more hours of the day and for a higher capacity. Here I'm going to go up above. Hopefully we can see a little bit of the trailer from above. I've got the panels there slightly angled, and I just recently learned that I've got to do something about the fact that the panels are above the roof, thus allowing for some sort of an airflow lift to be created. So I'm going to have to create some sort of a block at the top that will cause that will not allow the air to get underneath those panels, because otherwise going down the highway at 60 miles an hour, you could end up with lift causing those panels to rip off the top of the trailer. So I'm going to have to secure them as tightly as possible to the top of the roof first and foremost, which they clearly aren't at the moment. And then here at the front where this panel is, I'm going to have to get some sort of a metal barrier that's going to block the air from going under the panels and shoot it up over the top or around, so that the panels won't end up having a lift created by the airflow underneath them. That's sort of the long and the short of the system. Hope you enjoyed the video.